I know some of you must think I'm going to talk about fundraising the last session today. I'm tired. And I want to make sure that we give you some very practical advice as we move forward and as you move forward with your most important ministry objectives and to try to get them resourced. So what I'd like to do is first maybe answer this question of, is it biblical to ask for funds to support ministry? And we're going to walk through a few scriptures in that regard. And then Gary held up, and on your table you should have this little fold-out card. And I want to try to give you some very, very, very practical advice when you leave here today that you could apply to help grow and help fund your ministry objectives as you move forward. So let's look first at 2 Corinthians 9:7. Each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Let's go to the next one. Luke 6:38. Give, and it will be given unto you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Next one. Acts 20:35. In everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work we must help the weak, remembering the words the Lord Jesus himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Matthew 6:33. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Proverbs 3:9 through 10. Honor the Lord with your wealth, the first fruits of your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Proverbs 3:27 and 28. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, come back tomorrow and I'll give it to you, when you already have it with you. Next one, Malachi 3:10. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will be not room enough to store it. The next one. The Bible references money and possessions 2,300 times. It's more than Jesus talked about love, and it's more than he talked about heaven and hell combined. Think about that. Repetition. Repetition is important, and as we see that and we think about that, I would just challenge you that this is a piece of your work, of your ministry work, that is so important to get right. That is so important to get right. So, the simple formula for fundraising is where interest and capacity cross, there's your gift. I'm going to put an image on the screen here, and let me just kind of talk to you what this means first, and then I want you to think about it. The simple formula for fundraising is where interest and capacity cross, there's your gift. So here's interest going kind of the left to the right, and then capacity would be defined as the capacity for a donor to make a gift. A capacity for somebody, let's say, to fund your ministry objectives. So where interest and capacity cross, there's your gift. Now, I'm sure this has never happened to anyone in this room, but I know it's happened to Gary a few times, where he has asked for a certain level gift and he didn't get it. Is that right, Gary? You know, just a few times. I'm sure some of you in this room, that has happened as well. That you've prayerfully considered asking someone and you kind of mustered that courage, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and you've asked and you got something less than you had hoped for. And I'd like to tell you that I don't think, let's say we ask somebody for $10,000 US, and Gary, they decide to make a commitment of $2,000 US. Are they telling you, Gary, that they don't like you, that they don't like your ministry, just go away? I don't think so. I think what they're saying is, Gary, listen, I like you, I love your ministry, and right now I'm kind of weighing interest and capacity, and my interest level is at the $2,000 level. And we're going to thank him, and we're going to love them, and we're going to steward them, and hopefully move them through a process that we can raise that ultimate gift for your ministry. So we're interest and capacity cross. There's your gift. This is the shift. This is the paradigm shift I'd ask you to think about when we use the word in the U.S. fundraising or fundraisers. Gary used that earlier. I'd like to say we are not fundraisers. I'd like to say everyone in this room, you're interest raisers. So I have an opportunity to talk to lots of folks, thousands of folks across the country on this topic. And in a room this size, I like to ask the question, how many of you love to ask for money? Put up your hand. Okay, you must not have heard me. How many of you love to ask for money? Okay, look around. Not too many of you are raising your hand. Gary's doing it because he's supposed to, I guess, and he's caught the bug, right? Now, if I change that a little bit and said, not a fundraiser, but an interest raiser, how many of you could tell a compelling story about your ministry? How many of you could lock eyes with somebody and tell them how important your work is to the lifelong arc of the folks that you're serving? How many of you could be interest raisers? Raise your hand. There you go. So I just want to tell the shift in our thinking, and the shift in our thinking for the rest of our time this afternoon, is that we are interest raisers and we're not fundraisers. All right? So interest raisers together, let's kind of band together and move forward. So interest raising versus fundraising. Interest is generated when you capture their heart. Interest is generated when you capture their heart, when you talk about the important, life-changing work that you're doing. The next thought is relative to this whole notion of it's stories that do it, not statistics. It's stories that do it, not statistics. And let me just give you an example. You could say in your ministry that you serve 2,500 people a month. Impressive number. The person across from you might say, that's wonderful, 2,500 people a month. But I promise you that a more effective way to have their heart grow and get excited about your work is if you take one story, one family, one name of that 2,500 and tell that child's story. Okay? And tell that child's story. Now, statistics are important. Statistics are important, but back them up with amazing stories. Stories that you use will change, those stories that change the trajectory of somebody's life. When you're talking about someone to invest in your most important work, it's not a number, but it's a story, and it's a person, and it's how the trajectory of your ministry has changed because of your work and ultimately their investment in your work and your mission. Have the story told by somebody that they know, respect, and trust. Have the story told by somebody they know, respect, and trust. Gary and I have had some long conversations about this, and I said, Gary, guess what? You're paid to do this. They expect you to be excited. They expect you to come in with a smile and give them a bear hug and tell them how exciting this ministry is, but when there's somebody that they know, that they value, that they respect, when they walk in the room next to you, Gary, all of a sudden the credibility of your message goes up. And let that person lean in. Let that person help tell the story and advocate on your behalf. And I promise you, you'll get better results. I promise you, you'll get better results. And lastly, you know what? We're going to tell you a better story. As we walk through, and some practical advice for you this afternoon is if you can get better at telling your story, you're going to find that their heart grows and their passion grows and their interest goes up. And where interest and capacity cross, there's your gift. Okay? That's what we're up to. So I want you to take out that little handout that Gary referenced. It says Art of the Ask. And I want to walk through six key kind of bits of advice for you that might help you be a better asker and ultimately will help you raise additional funds for your ministry. Okay? So number one is telling your better story. Here's an outline. And I can tell you, I sit down with folks that are absolutely passionate about their ministry work. And they just jump right in and say, hi, I'm wondering, could you help us with X? They give no context, or they throw out some numbers almost like an annual report. And it's so many numbers that the poor person across the table can hardly contain them. 2,500 and 2,700% and this and that and poverty, and it's just hard for them to follow it. So the first piece here is telling your better story, and this is an outline that I've worked with folks for years, and I promise you it works. So think about this. This is the simple outline. Who was the person? What was the situation? What did your organization do to help? How has the situation improved? And how does this story represent the greater impact of your organization? Simple outline. Who was the person? So let's say we serve 2,500 people. We talked about that. Let's take one child. All right? Who was that child? What was the child's name? What was their situation? Paint a word picture for them as to this is the reality of this child. Okay? What's the challenge? Thirdly, what did we do to help? We stepped in and we provided X and we helped this. And you know what? How does this represent what we do in the rest of the region for the rest of those 2,499 folks that we talk about? All right? And lastly, how can we tell this story more impactfully, right? As we gross up those numbers, and Gary and I will talk a lot about this. Statistics are important, but the story will capture your heart. So who is the person? What was the situation? What did your organization do to help? How has the situation improved? And how does this story represent the greater impact of your organization? I have a challenge for you. When you can't sleep because of the time change, take a pencil out and do a quick outline and create your own storyline. What would be your storyline for your ministry? And hone that story. We have to tell a better story. Now, it's interesting. There's two important words in this thing called fundraising, and it's what and why. What and why. I think we focus way too much time on what. And the what is the easy thing. The what is in the U.S. when they say we want to build a new library, we want to build a new church, we want to build a new activity center. That's the what. And it's going to hold this much water, and it's going to be this many square feet, and it's going to have this many wonderful features. That's the what. But if you really want to grow the heart of the person sitting across from you, and you really want to engage them in this work, you want to focus on the why. W-H-Y. Why is it important? And I would challenge you to think about what is the why, the W-H-Y, that you need to kind of convey to the person sitting across from you. Now, there's two interesting hitchhike things for us. Later in the summit this week, Simon Sinek will be talking about why. This why is an important word, and we've got to focus on it. Michael J. has been a good friend of the summit. He's made us laugh through the years, and he focuses on these two words, and I wanted to play this clip to further illustrate.
So the series is called How Do I Know? And a lot of times when people hear the phrase, how do I know, the next thing they say is what? How do I know what? But the key really isn't to know what. The key is to know why. Because when you know your why, you have options on what your what can be. For instance, my why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. My what is stand-up comedy. My what is writing books. My what can be going out with some friends to eat. In fact, another what that has moved me towards my why is a web series that we have out now called Break Time. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, you should subscribe to the channel. We do a series called Break Time on YouTube. So 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode. One episode in particular, I'm about to show you a clip to. We were in Winston-Salem. So Break Time, this is how it works. I travel the country, I do stand-up comedy, probably an hour, hour and a half at an event. And in the middle of my show, I'll just sit down and start talking to the audience. And funny just happens. Or I'll meet somebody who's really interesting. So I met this one guy, and he said that he teaches music at a school. I was like, all right, you teach music, can you sing? And then I'm just gonna show you the clip. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so Let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I see. So here's the thing. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time I asked him to sing, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose.
So when you know your why, your what has more impact. That's such a great illustration of, as we tell our story, folks, connect with the why, and that will help grow their heart. Number 2 on the handout they have, questions that matter. This is the number one question that I get with folks, and they say, Bruce, it appears as if you have no problem talking and talking fast. But sometimes when I sit down, what would I even say? How do I even start the conversation? This kind of scares me. In fact, when I sit down to ask somebody for support, I see it on my calendar, on my schedule, and I get that feeling in my stomach, and I just don't want to do this. Any of you feel that way? There's nods and smiles. Okay, good. So this is just some help maybe as to how can you make that conversation. Some of you, there's a piece of you or a group of you that's no problem. You can talk and you can keep the conversation. There's the rest of us that probably need some help. And these are what I call questions that matter. Tell me your story. That will fill up most of the lunch. Okay? Tell me your story. And I've got a hint for you, and Gary, I think you'd agree with this. People like to talk about themselves, right? And as they talk about their story, you start to learn the rich texture of their life, where their heart beats quickly, and allows you to get to know them in a way that perhaps you didn't know them just a few short minutes earlier. Then ask them, do you have a story about our organization? How well do you know us? Why do you support us? Let's say that they've given you support in the past, right? Why do you volunteer for us? What are the causes and the organizations that you support? What are the other things that you support? These are all important questions because people want to share that, and they will tell you. And as you understand their total story, it allows you to be a better connector of your own story, of your ministry, and the interest will grow. What questions do you have about us, and would you consider supporting us? This isn't a direct ask. Just, hey, would you ever thought about that? These questions, folks, it is so important. It is so important to not sit down and say, hello, my name is Bruce, I'd like some money. In the States, we call that speed dating. And that doesn't work in major gift fundraising. Okay? So we want to slow it down a little bit, and we want to understand their story. We want to understand where they are. Number 3, getting the meeting. I used to never include this in this talk. And people started to come up to me, and this is the toughest thing. I can do a pretty good job if I'm sitting in front of them, but just getting them to commit to a meeting is tough. And so here's just something that I've used, and maybe it's helpful. But first you got to kind of think, before you ask this person to this meeting, is what's in it for them, right? What are their interests? Why would they even want to take the meeting or support your organization? Get that in your head. Just make sure you're prepped for that. And then ask them if they'd consider sitting down and visiting with you. Now, most of the time, when I ask somebody, will you sit down and visit with me, their answer back, and Gary, I think you'd agree with this too, is, I don't have enough time. Why don't you just send me something? Why don't you send me an email? And usually that's code word for you're never going to hear from me again. Okay? So I like to use this in just kind of this language, and I use this language almost every week. And this is what I say. This is so personally important to me, I'm willing to wait. When might your calendar have an opening? So they say they're too busy. Now this is very practical advice, folks. They say they're too busy, and you say, you know what, I understand that. I've got a big, busy calendar too. But I'm willing to wait. When might your calendar open up? And it's amazing when you do that. They'll say, well, maybe next Tuesday at 3. Whereas 5 minutes ago, they said they were too busy. But what you did is you reframed it to them and said, this is so important to me. This is so vitally important to me. I'd really like some time. And now all of a sudden, they know kind of the gravity of and the seriousness, right, that you're coming to this meeting, and you're going to find that their calendar opens up. So make sure you do some homework. Understand just why they should even take the meeting, and then be patient with the calendars. Now let's look at number 4, preparing for the meeting. This is a step that we often don't do, and this is why I think we're not as successful as we could be. But the first question is, what's the best outcome of this meeting? Are we going to ask them for support today? Are we just going to give them a tour of our facility? Which I would encourage you, take it slow, tell your story, get to know them, show them all of your ministry, and let them kind of have their heart grow before you make that ask. Who else needs to be involved, right? What's the best environment to have a meeting? I can tell you, I typically don't enjoy having these meetings over a meal. Unless it's in a private home, because just when I'm ready to have a thoughtful conversation, a waiter and water and food comes, and it's awkward, and it's hard to have that conversation. So in a public space, I would just warn you that perhaps that public space isn't the best. What information materials do you need to have with you to tell your story? But I tell you just a little bit of advice. I think sometimes we want our materials in our brochures to sing and dance and ask for money, and I'm here to tell you that's our job. Okay? Not the materials, not the website, not the video, but for us to lock eyes and really tell that important work that you're doing. And the most important thing in bullet on number 4 here, and Gary alluded to it, is this: what is the leadership level gift you'll be asking for? So this is the homework. Before you sit down with any donor, and I would encourage you, one of the things that works very, very well with our clients is to think about who might your top 20 prospects be? Who are the 20 most important folks that could change the trajectory of your ministry? And if you could sit down and challenge them to a leadership level gift, it could change the face of your work. So you take and put those names down. In fact, a couple years ago, I met right after this meeting with some pastors. And we went through a version of this, and they sent me an email later, a couple months later, and said, it works. We've raised significantly more for the ministry, thank you. But they said the most important thing that they learned was identifying who those 20 might be. Who are the 20? And I challenge you to do that. Who might be the 20 that most important folks that could change the trajectory of your ministry? And then the second question is, and most important, What might a leadership level gift be from those folks? So with Gary's illustration, that was 880,000. I don't know why it's such an odd number. You can ask him later about that. But it was 880,000. And you would then have this list and kind of who the 20 are and get ready to have those conversations. But what's the leadership level gift you're thinking of asking for? And now 5, which you think, boy, it takes a long time for him to get to the advice here, this is the ask. So number 5, when it's time to ask. I used to get very nervous about asking folks for support early on in my career. In fact, I'd have one letter that would ask for one amount and another letter in this pocket that would ask for this amount. And depending on how the lunch or the event was going, right? And then I'd think, well, was it the left one or the right one? Which one? And I'd be so distracted by my letters and my materials, I could hardly get the ask out. And I would see it on my calendar, folks, and I would be so worked up and so nervous. And it just didn't seem like the respectful way to do this work. So this is how we landed years ago and now with our clients, and I'd encourage you to do this, and Gary talked about it. This is the language, and this is why it's on the card. When it's time to ask, when you've taken the time to show them your ministry, and you're not going too quickly, and you've told your story, and they know those numbers, and they know the impacts, and they know the specific stories, then you say, you know what, I'd like to ask permission to ask you for a gift. And they look at you like, you what? No one asks folks for permission to ask for a gift. So now you've set yourself apart, right? And it's I'd like permission to ask you for a gift. I don't want to ask for too little, and I don't want to ask for too much, but how might we secure a leadership level gift from you? And what do you think the next question is? What's a leadership level gift? And then you've done your homework. And you had that number. Gary had his crazy number for this person. And you look and you say, you know what? Well, it's 880,000 US. Or it's $10,000. And then guess what you do? The best advice I can give you after you have that conversation is to be quiet. Silence. We don't deal well with silence. But be quiet. And so often with folks that I'm coaching, and I watch them do this early on in the processes, they say, would you consider an $880,000 leadership level gift? And the person says, are you kidding me? I've never given that kind of money to the ministry before. And your inclination will be to jump in and say, hey, let's forget we ever had this conversation. Right? How about lunch and we just go? All right? But don't do that, because so often it starts, 880,000, are you kidding me? We've never given that kind of level support to the ministry, but you know what? Boy, all my kids have benefited from this, or I've seen your work firsthand, or I have a couple employees, and I know that, and all of a sudden they kind of talk their way to a circle to say, I'll consider that. And if you just let silence and let their own discussion and their own kind of conversation with you happen, you're going to be more successful. So be quiet and listen. And then you know what? Sometimes they say, well, I'll think about that. How about if you get back to me in 3 weeks or a month? Or sometimes they don't say that, but they don't make a commitment. It's our responsibility to say, when would be the right time to get back with you? And then write it down. And make that commitment to get back. I can't tell you how many people go through all of this and work so hard, and then they don't do the follow-up, okay? And the last piece of here, number 6, after the meeting and the gift, let's take a look at that list. Thank you letters, notes, keep the donors informed. There's nothing more powerful than a thank you, folks. And I think this is a spot that we collectively could do a better job with. If we can think about those people that mattered in their life, that maybe came along on the visit, a thank you from the institution is powerful. But a thank you from a trusted friend is even more powerful. Think about stewardship, because the best predictor of future giving is current giving. The best predictor of future giving is current giving. You might have some special meetings, you might have some special events, and invite them along. So I would like to challenge you as I wrap my thoughts up here in this practical talk about asking. Is I know you can all be interest raisers. And I know that you can all tell a compelling story. I also know there are folks in your community that could fund your hopes and dreams for your ministry. And I would challenge you tonight, get your better story. I would challenge you to write down who those 20 might be. And I would challenge you to take the time to grow your relationship with them and grow your heart. Your work is the most important work. And I can't thank you enough for the commitment that you've made with your own time and resources to be here, and to be here at Willow for this amazing event in the next few days. It was an honor to be with you. Thank you. And if you'd like to have some resources from us, we've put together in case and leadership and prospecting and a plan, donorbydesign.com/GLS. And if you go there, you'll find some resources that we'd just love to give to you as a thank you. You inspire me. You inspire my team. Thank you very much.